think a lot of us can agree on something. There's a certain kind of comfort in watching someone else play a horror game. You're not the one holding the controller. You're not the one opening the door. And whatever is waiting on the other side isn't coming for you, right? Despite the danger not being able to reach you, it still manages to reach us in a way. You are likely still tense while watching gameplay. It's strange, isn't it? Like most of the people watching this, I've spent a lot of time watching YouTubers play games, especially scary games. And one creator I enjoyed most was Jacksepticeye. He played a game called Fears to Fathom, and almost immediately, something felt different. The gameplay was rather simplistic, and so were the graphics, but it felt so much more real than any indie horror game I'd seen before. The game was quiet and took its time. Indie horror has exploded over the last decade, and with that explosion came a kind of formula. Grainy VHS filters, analog distortion, low poly PlayStation 2 style graphics, liminal spaces. It's a style that can be incredibly effective, but it has also become oversaturated. A lot of games rely on the aesthetic to be the horror, but Fears to Fathom does something different. It uses these elements to enhance its own abilities. Turn off the VHS effect, and I think Fears to Fathom still gets the horror vibe across. The real horror comes from something much quieter, something more familiar. Because the scariest part of Fears to Fathom isn't what you see, it's what feels possible. The game doesn't focus on the paranormal or extraterrestrial. It focuses on the horror of reality. The reality that you don't need to make a monster when humans can be far worse. It wasn't just me who realized that something was different about Fears to Fathom. It was a feeling that much of the horror gaming community felt. The series now spans 5 massively successful games, all of which have been streamed by dozens of very popular content creators and have garnered over millions of views, as well as inspired a vast amount of video game developers to try and capture the same feeling of Fears to Fathom. But how did this seemingly unassuming game redefine the indie horror field? Join me as I share the story of the creator of Fears to Fathom, Rail. Rail, or Mukul Neji in real life, released Fears to Fathom, Home Alone, in 2021, but obviously his story began much earlier than that. His story doesn't begin with developing, it starts with observing. At around 10 years old, Rail would spend hours watching his uncle play Grand Theft Auto Vice City, not playing it himself, just watching, which is kind of fitting, because years later, millions of people would be doing just the exact same thing, watching someone else play his game. By the time he was 12, he had already started experimenting with game development. A friend introduced him to a programming platform called Scratch, and from there, something clicked. He would spend years learning, building, experimenting, and creating small games, refining ideas, and slowly getting better. But there was a problem. Passion doesn't always translate into sustainability. By the time he was 16, he realized an unfortunate reality that most creators eventually face. He wasn't making any money. This is usually where things stop, where a hobby stays a hobby or just completely disappears entirely. But Rail kept going. At age 17, he co-created a game called Loopables, which even won an award. It was a sign, proof that he was capable of making something meaningful. Still, recognition doesn't guarantee a future. After high school, he enrolled at Delhi Technological University, continuing his studies while holding onto game development in the background. And during this time, something quietly influenced him. At night, he would fall asleep listening to a YouTuber known as Mr. Nightmare. He was popular for narrating horror stories and creepypastas sent in by his viewers. If you've ever listened to those kinds of videos, you know the format. Simple storytelling, minimal visuals, no over-the-top effects, just a story that feels like it could have happened to anyone. And one night, before falling asleep, Rail asked a question to himself. Why aren't there horror games like this? Not long, drawn-out experiences, not overly complex systems, just short, grounded, personal stories, the kind that linger and the kind that can happen to anyone. Eventually, that idea turned into something real. Rail began working on what he believed might be his final game project. It would be his biggest gamble, and if it didn't work out, that would be it for his game developing career. To make it happen, he invested around $500 to $600 into Unity assets. He was in college at the time. That would be a massive amount of money for something that might not pay off. It was a significant risk, but he did it as a reason to make his dream a reality, because now there was something to lose. If he gave up, that money and all that time tied to it would mean nothing, so he didn't stop. During college, while others went out, he stayed in, working, refining, building something that, at the time, no one was asking for. A quiet horror game about a horrible situation in the ordinary day of life. He was also inspired by an indie horror game called Convenience Store by Chilla's Art.
So, just starting out, I saw a streamer playing a Chilla's Art game called Convenience Store, and I just looked at it and it just like gave me like a feeling of like coziness, which is really weird for a horror game. But to me, it worked really well because the idea is you make the player feel all cozy, you make them feel all safe, and then you get the tension up. So I think that works really, really well. So yeah, Chilla.
After about a year of dedicated work, Rail released his game on July 2nd, 2021. Fears to Fathom, Home Alone, was out. It wasn't perfect. There were bugs, rough edges, small issues that needed patching, but none of that mattered, because almost immediately, people paid attention. The game spread quickly across YouTube, not because of marketing, not because of hype, but because it worked. Creators picked it up, played it, shared it, and something about it stuck. Within its first week on Steam, it reached the top spot in free games. Shortly after, it made its way to the platform's front page. And within just 3 months, it had been downloaded over 1,400,000 times for a small, independently developed horror game. That was massive. But why did this simple game attract the hearts of so many? It's because Fears to Fathom doesn't rely on spectacle. It relies on tension, on pacing, on the slow realization that something isn't right. Even when nothing obvious is happening, everything feels just slightly off. The empty feeling of the house, feeling watched. The game doesn't outwardly tell you this. The atmosphere just makes you feel uneasy, and yet it oddly comforts you. The game has you do the mundane. You cook food and watch TV, all in the comfort of your home. It's a feeling everyone can probably relate to. Fears to Fathom makes us predisposed to relate to the characters. It makes us think, this could have been me. Ever since the release of the first game, Home Alone, Rail has continued expanding the series, releasing multiple entries, including the follow-up game, Norwood Hitchhike, each game refining the formula, and in just a few years, Fears to Fathom has grown into a full franchise. 5 very successful games, and a new co-op game releasing very soon. The series has received awards, recognition, and perhaps most impressive, influence, because now you can see it everywhere. Dozens of developers are trying to recreate the same feeling, the same pacing, the same quiet dread. But here's the thing about that kind of horror. It's not easy to replicate, because it's not just about how the game looks, it's about how it feels. Because not everyone understands the idea like Rail did. They only see his popularity, but they don't know the journey that led to his success. Most horror games try to scare you. Fears to Fathom does something more subtle. It makes you uneasy. It makes you hesitate. It makes you question things you normally wouldn't, like checking a door twice, or maybe looking out a window just a little longer than usual. And maybe that's why it works so well on YouTube, because even as a viewer, even when you're completely safe, you start to feel it too. That creeping sense that something is wrong, that something is watching, that something is waiting. And it's easy to feel scared when the horrors are wrapped up in the mundane days of life. Rail set out to create something simple, short, grounded horror stories, nothing overly ambitious, nothing revolutionary, and yet that simplicity is exactly what made it stand out. Because in a genre filled with noise and frightening creatures, he chose to focus on something more real, a fear that is quiet but always present, something you can feel even after the video ends.